is Keen On, the daily Now.tv chat show with some of the world's leading thinkers and writers. Hello everybody, happy March. It's Friday the 1st of March, first Friday in March, and if it's Friday it must be that was the week. Our weekly summary of tech news with my friend Keith here, and this week, according to Keith at least, there's an elephant in the room. And this elephant and I don't know why he keeps on insisting on having dreadful AI art, but he is. And as always, we're talking about AI. So it's both the media and the message, or the medium and the message in our conversation. We have an image of an elephant in front or in Google's office. I'm not sure, Keith, how many elephants will see this, but I hope you're not offending the elephant species. This elephant looks typically like an elephant, although I'm sure from an elephant perspective, there's something about it that will offend. What elephant is in the room this week, Keith?
So this relates to some essays three essays in this week's newsletter, one by Noah Smith, and then two others that talk about Google's experience with Gemini, where it created images of historical subjects that were diverse, let's say. That is to say, it made people black who would never not have been black in the real world. And it was such an extreme.
What do you mean it made people black that weren't black in the real world? You mean like the
founding fathers, for example,
or making Nazi soldiers black?
But that was one. The other was the Google founders. It was asked who the Google founders were.
Yeah, but I think they're spiritually Asian, the Google founders. I shouldn't say that. I'll get thrown off the air. Yeah, the Google founders now have come across as Asian, which will thrill, I'm sure, our Asian viewers, maybe not our Jewish ones. So what's going on here? We are treading into the culture wars. For not the first or the last time you and I have talked about this. What's gone wrong?
Well, this week is the week of reflection. The news about this was last week, but this week there's a lot of reflection, including Sundar, the CEO, saying it was unacceptable, and it's not clear what he's going to do, but he's promising to do something.
Is Sundar black, Keith? How does Gemini represent the CEO of Google as a Nazi female Asian soldier?
Probably, yeah, probably. But isn't it amazing that the strength of the diversity, inclusion, and equity movement leads to Google engineers artificially programming their AI to be on the leading edge of representation?
Well, that's the conservative view. You didn't include Andrew Sullivan's piece this week, which he's, as always, frothing at the mouth over the DEI thing. To be fair, not all the essays. You talk about three essays this week. A couple, one by Noah Smith, the Ben Thompson strategy one, who you've often referred to, and also Alex Kantrowitz. I mean, they don't all agree, Kantrowitz in particular, that this is about DEI, do they? I mean, it's the easy, that's in my view at least, the lazy interpretation.
Well, it isn't not about DEI either. That's the interesting thing. There's some nuance here. Maybe we can tease out the nuance.
Well, maybe you can talk about what the Smith, the Kantrowitz, and the Thompson pieces all argue.
Yeah. So the Noah opinion piece, "This is not a good way to fight racism," is the lengthiest, and I think very thoughtful, acknowledging that acknowledging racism first, acknowledging oppression, acknowledging that there is a problem, and then
what do you mean acknowledging oppression? What does that mean?
Well, acknowledging that the Black experience is not equal to the white experience, even in 2024, in terms of opportunity, and that therefore there is such a thing as structural racism or systemic racism, and so he's not.
Do you have to? I mean, because you do a little bit of this, Keith. I'm usually gentle with you, but maybe I'll be less gentle. I mean, why is it that anytime anyone ever discusses this, they have to do virtue signaling to somehow say, and you do it in your editorial, well, I'm not a racist. I did blah, blah, blah in my life, and therefore I have a right to talk about it. Why do people have to say that?
Because racism's a real thing, and if you haven't done anything, shame on you.
I haven't.
You have. I seem to recall at some point that you are. I don't know. I don't want to talk about your personal life, but there is lots of evidence that you are not a racist. Let's say
but the point is that.
But being a racist.
But why does anyone who have to, whenever we have to talk about this, they have to, and you're not alone. And as you say, Smith does it. That you have to virtual signal by saying, well, I'm not a racist. I acknowledge blah, 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 and therefore I have a right to talk about it.
I don't think it's because you have the right. I think you want the world to know that you're not a white supremacist. Because
who is it? I mean, how many white supremacists are there?
Well, I think you understand why. You're just...
no, I don't. I'm really serious.
Then I'll explain it to you. The narrative around race has got to the point where it's very similar to the Palestine-Israeli narrative, where there's no middle ground. It is assumed that you're either one thing or the other. And therefore, unless you kowtow to those who want to know that you're anti-racist, you don't even get into the conversation. You're immediately.
So you're saying that let's leave the Arab-Israeli thing out, because that's just another elephant in the room. The second elephant in the room. Maybe we'll deal with that next week. The Jewish and Arab elephant, the Arab and the Muslim and Jewish elephant. But I mean, can you have a Jewish elephant, Keith?
Why not? It's probably got a circumcised trunk. That's the only difference.
Now you're going to get into trouble. But in all seriousness, are you saying that when it comes to race, either you have to prove that you're an anti-racist, or you're a white, or for that matter, I guess, black supremacist? There's nothing in between? I
think the narrative or the discussion has degenerated to the point where I think it's driven by identity politics myself, but there is a fear of expressing hostility to a specific tactic in anti-racism, because you are absolutely certain that you will be depicted as a racist, or at least contributing to racism, and that's the polarization of the debate, and that's real. It is very real.
Shouldn't we, you and I, at least as adults, avoid that and simply say, well, I don't have to prove my anti-racist credentials by being able to talk about this?
I agree with you, and by the way, I don't think I ever do that, but I do.
Well, you did in this essay, because
well, what I did is said I'm an anti-racist, and shared some of my history, not in order to buy myself space, but just to make the statement, yes, there is racism. And what I wanted to do then is leverage that platform to be able to say, but what Google did isn't fighting it. What Google did actually may be making it worse.
So what's going on here? So the Google Gemini AI algorithm put its big elephant foot in what way? What did it do wrong? And why is this creating another round of these culture wars?
Well, we can have opinions about that. My opinion is that it amplified a view that the right way to fight racism is at the level of appearance. That is to say that you, and this can take the form of hiring someone for a job that is black, but not as good as a white candidate you passed over.
Well, racism is about appearance. It's skin color. So I guess that's...
Yeah, but actually, I think there's a deeper issue there, which is the problem racists, or is the problem racism? And racist and racism to me are not the same thing. A racist is an individual, and it's someone making decisions from a perspective of racism. A racist is an individual, And there's a strong imperative to challenge individuals, but actually, whether it's a producer casting for a movie, or a theater director casting for a play, or editing a book to remove various references, that level of dealing with race, of the expression of racism, does absolutely nothing to get rid of racism, because racism is not to do with the consequences. The consequences are how individuals speak, think, and act. But the cause is much deeper than that. And what happens is, let's say Google would have gotten away with this.
Gotten away with what?
With making Nazis black for diversity reasons, for example. Let's say Google, no one had noticed, or everyone was okay with it. It wouldn't change the life expectancy of a black kid in East Palo Alto in an elementary school where he doesn't have money for school meals and his teachers suck. The causes of racism are much deeper than the appearances.
Okay, well, let's talk specifically about this Google thing. There was an interesting piece that Sullivan connected with about suggesting that Google has changed. Initially, the search engine was designed to be objective, whatever that means. And now this Gemini has been designed to correct social injustice. Is that what Smith and Thompson and Kantrowitz are saying?
That's part of what they all say. They all have their different angles, but that is part of what each one of them says that. One of them suggests that Google culture has been taken over, which I think is unfair, because all culture has been taken over by this point of view. Google's just an example of normal life. It's not especially different to any other culture. Culture has become, if you like, a censor of the truth by insisting that the version of the truth that's told is a particular version.
So there's elephants in all our rooms, Keith, not just Google.
Yeah, it's a stage of society where ideology and narrative are the level of abstraction at which things are sought to be corrected, rather than in society itself.
So what Google's doing then, according to a lot of critics, is using this Gemini AI feature to always represent people of different skin colors, which explains why you get black female or Asian female, black male Nazi soldiers. There's no historical context. The algorithm doesn't understand that you shouldn't do that with members of the SS.
Well, they programmed an override which took the form of, no matter what you prompt, if it's asking for visuals of people, it added onto the end, hidden from view, and please make this diverse. So whether you're asking for Nazis or Google founders or the founding fathers, it added invisible to you, and please make the answer diverse.
And was it serious?
Yeah.
So this wasn't a comic feature.
No, it was a safety. They call it safety. The word safety now means, something other than safety.
What's the opposite of safety, Keith?
Danger.
Yeah. So this is dangerous stuff. I mean, they got themselves in huge trouble. The markets responded negatively. They lost billions of dollars in value because. So who's to blame here?
I don't. Of course, there are individuals who did that programming, and some product manager told them to do it. So there will be an answer to that. I don't know the actual answer, but I would say that those individuals are just playing out what is now normal in every university campus, in every publishing house, apart from contrarians, that
like you and I.
Yeah. So I think it's symptomatic of something not to do with Google, which is
So
like,
that's one interpretation, which Smith, I think, as you say, you got three essays, one by Noah Smith, one by Ben Thompson, and one by Alex Kantrowitz.
Ben Thompson, by the way, calls for Satya to be fired.
Right, which I was probably not the first or the last. I think Smith takes the cultural view. Thompson makes it clear that he's not really a strong political writer, but there is some politics here. Whereas Kantrowitz takes a counter view and sees it as a product of Google corporate culture. What does Kantrowitz? And I have to admit, I'm much more sympathetic to the Kantrowitz reading, that it's just a fucked up company. It grew too fast. It's bureaucratic, bad leadership, and it's really doesn't fit into this sort of the Andrew Sullivan argument that the world is going to hell because of DEI.
I think both things can be true, but I also agree with Ken.
Well,
I made the subtitle of this week's newsletter, Big Tech and the Fear of Controversy. And I think if you wanted to characterize Google's culture, it's a fear of screwing up more than the bravery to test new things. And I think it expresses that. It's like, let's not get into trouble here. Because if you remember, both Microsoft and Google have had prior experiences with AI, of the AI becoming racist. So this, if anything, is a kind of a...
But this wouldn't happen. I mean, it's easy to say, but it's hard to imagine this would happen at Amazon or Apple or even Microsoft. So there's something about Google that distinguishes it from other big tech companies.
Surprisingly, part of it is shipping too early. They're in a competition with OpenAI, and that is compelling them to ship early so that they're in the race. So it's possible the oversight here was less than perfect.
But didn't someone play with it? I mean, surely even the CEO has a computer. He can actually try it out.
Yeah, but probably what they did is test it to see if it's racist, and it would have passed that test.
Probably. I think that's an extreme. So who's testing it? The CEO? You mean he's less interested? He's only interested in whether or not it's racist. He's Indian, by the way.
He is Indian.
I admit don't buy that. What?
Let's admit that we're guessing what happened there because we don't really know. But there will have been some level of testing, but it won't have been. I mean, why would you test whether Nazis could be black? It wouldn't occur to you to even test that, would it? Because it's so weird.
Well, it's weird, but you'd think someone at Google would have actually played around with it and tested it. I mean, maybe not the particular Nazi thing, but some of the other stuff that everyone. I mean, it's open season on Google because this first version of Gemini, on one level at least, is so bad, so absurd.
Yeah, Joe Lonsdale was at a conference yesterday in LA, that the Upfront Ventures conference, and he was a panelist, and he made the point that this is simply the price you pay for woke culture. I didn't use that word anyway. I don't like the word woke actually, but it's the price you pay when you're mainly driven by politics and influence instead of logic and facts.
But that's the Smith take. I mean, what would Kantrowitz say? Kantrowitz would simply say it's a badly run company. It grew too fast. Morale is plummeting. Everybody wants to leave. That happened at Microsoft. Yeah. It will eventually happen probably at Apple and Amazon. That's just the nature of corporate ups and downs, that it's not part of this whole woke DEI narrative.
Well, his key quote is, at Google, it's impossible to navigate and understand who owns things. That's the Google Trust and Safety team. Maybe that's by design so that nobody can ever get in trouble for failure, is what they said. So fear and hiding from accountability, is what he brings together.
But what else does it tell us, Keith, about, and you and I have talked about this endlessly, another of the headlines today is about the Supreme Court case last week about whether or not Texas and Florida should be able to determine what you do and don't see on social media. How much of this is bound up in all of our, and this may be the real elephant in the room, our unwillingness to acknowledge that whatever you see on your media, someone is determining what you see, for better or worse. You know, the right always claims it's the left always claims it's the right, women always claim it's men always claim it's women, blacks always claim it's whites always claim it's black, but somebody is determining what you see, right?
Actually, that's a choice. You can have your Twitter feed go just time-based, or you can ask the algorithm. In my case, I ask the algorithm, and it's a way better feed than the one that's purely time-based with everyone in it. So I like the algorithm, but other people might hate it. But
So
I
you
don't
mean
think
at
that
Twitter you can, it's entirely arbitrary.
what is.
Absolutely 100% arbitrary. You can get anything or anyone.
Yeah, you just go and switch it to
But
latest.
then somebody would say, well, you've made the decision to go to X. You could have gone to Threads or Twtw.
Yeah, but I don't think curation of content is the problem here. The problem is the insane belief that you can create an ideologically acceptable feed for yourself and not see stuff you disagree with. Because if you think about it, you know, sitting in any workplace or any classroom, you would never believe you could get rid of the people you disagree with. So why on social media do we have the gall to believe that we can erase disagreement?
So maybe there's a difference between Gemini and Google search. In the old days, when you went to Google and you asked for something, it would give you 10 options. You don't get those options with Gemini, do you? So is the problem the medium itself, that with AI, you only see one thing?
Well, that's it, up to you. You can say to Gemini or OpenAI, please give me the 10 most popular answers to the following question with a wide
Do
range
you
of
think
different...
that might be, Keith? Maybe, well, I'm thinking aloud here. Maybe that's because I don't see, we're going to continually be having these conversations. Maybe that's the way to address this, is that anytime you enter anything into any of these AI algorithms, you get 10 responses, going from what it sees as the most liberal to the most reactionary.
I think it depends what you're looking for. I mean, I think you got to trust individuals to know how to ask questions and not try to get in between them and the answer, you know, which implies that you know better than either them or the AI.
Right.
This idea that there are arbiters of content, that Supreme Court case, by the way, is all about that.
Right, but the point is that you're always going to have that. So should you be able to, should there be an algorithm where it says, tell me what a Nazi soldier would look like, and I'm interested in our 2024 version versus the historical one. So you'd always have that option.
Yeah, you can ask for anything if you're specific. What Google did is modify your query without your knowledge in order to produce results it believed would not get it into trouble. So I've said this many times, the minute you become an editor, you know...
But you're all, isn't that, I mean, this is maybe where you and I disagree. You're always going to be an editor. The question is, and
no, you don't have to be. Why do
hold
you
on, I mean, the question is how you put the question. So
yeah, but you don't want Google to modify your question after you've put it.
we can give you options of what you see. So if you say, I want an image of a Nazi soldier, it can be the image determined by Nazis, by 2024 culture warriors, by men, by women, by Jews. I mean, there's all sorts of versions we can get of Nazi soldiers.
Yeah, you can ask for anything, but you're missing my point. My point is that, can you trust the interface you're typing into not to change your request without your knowledge?
Well, you should be able to, shouldn't you?
You should be able to. That's the very point. And Google broke that trust. They did.
Future, they won't break it in the future. How do we get beyond this to be more explicit in terms of, in being more honest with the user about what the kind of information
I think,
visually or textually that they see?
yeah, I think the user should be told you're interacting with an AI at a very early stage of its development. It's prone to make mistakes. Please, modify your queries to improve the results you get if you don't like the ones you see. And it's between you and the AI. Good luck.
Yeah, but the point I'm trying to make, maybe this is where you and I disagree, is there's always something behind the AI. The AI is a product of a company. There's a business model there also. I mean, one of the reasons perhaps why Google's struggling so much is because they struggled in the early days of search. They didn't have a business model, but they were a startup, so it didn't matter, and no one knew anything they were doing. They're also presumably searching for a business model. They're a business. They're not a public service.
I worked with Google before they had a business model, and they had $25 million in the bank in those days, 1997, 98. And they were not particularly preoccupied with business model. They just wanted to be the best search engine, and they came to business model later. Now
they had the luck, but my point is they had the luxury because firstly they had patient VCs or VCs with a degree of patience, and they were a startup, so no one really knew what they were doing. And then in the end, Schmidt came in and forced them to address their business model.
Well, no, that was much later. They fixed the business model well before Schmidt. They invented AdSense and AdWords, and the idea that you could be at the top of search, where initially it didn't even say it was an ad, but later on they were.
Well, they were anti-ad in the first place, so they kind of swallowed their dislike of advertising.
Correct. Exactly right. Just like OpenAI has moved from being open source to being commercial. So that's a normal path. What's happening now is a bit different. Google is in fear of losing its business model. It is acutely aware that AI is not a replacement at the business model level. So despite that, they have to innovate there, because otherwise they're going to lose all their users, or not all, but a lot of their users, to AI.
So it's the AOL Yahoo problem.
It's the innovator's dilemma. It's Christensen.
Which always happens, which happens to everybody, every company, from Microsoft onwards. I wonder what the Microsoft people must be thinking, because they've been through this. Why is Microsoft able to dodge some of these crises, even though they're equally large, with layers of bureaucracy and an Indian CEO who wasn't the original founder? What's Microsoft doing right, do you think, that Google isn't?
Microsoft, I don't know whether it was accidental or on purpose, but they've played a clever game of supporting OpenAI and now Mistral, which they invested in this week, the French AI company. And so they are supporting third parties using their infrastructure as currency, and therefore are not directly in the firing line either as an innovator, because they're sitting behind other people's tech and decisions. Whereas Google doesn't have that luxury. They didn't get those investments, and it would be against their nature to do that, because they're a not invented here kind of organization culturally. And therefore they take it direct hits when things go wrong. Microsoft doesn't. OpenAI takes those hits.
Do you think that Google is in crisis? Do you think that the CEO is going to be pushed out?
One would hope not. I mean, one hopes.
Why?
Well, because he's a decent CEO. You give people a chance to learn from their errors. I don't see any reason to fire him, to be honest. I mean, you'd have to fire every university administration if you were firing him, because they do this kind of stuff every single day in class.
Say that word again, class.
Class.
Yeah, but universities are in a different business from Google. He's not being analyzed in whether he's fair or not, or just. He's being analyzed in how much money he's made. The investors have lost billions this week because of the screw up. Someone's going to push him out, aren't they?
Yeah, but if you look at their stock chart, the billions they've lost are billions that they didn't even have a few months ago, because their stock price has gone up so much due to his success.
But you're in Palo Alto, so you mix with all these big tech people. Is there something particularly broken in your view about Google culture?
Yes, but that's true of almost every culture. I think Apple is the most.
But you just didn't. I asked you a simple question, Keith.
No, I said yes. I said
broken, or is it like all big companies?
I said yes, but Google isn't any more subject to those pressures than anyone. If you look at Apple, actually, Apple's probably done the best job of being resilient in the face of these cultural issues.
Yeah, but then Apple, and this takes us off Google to Apple. Another piece of news today, and Apple did a great job in hiding it, is they've canceled their electric car plans, billions of dollars. They completely fucked up, but no one's calling for Tim Cook's head. Why? How have they done this? Isn't this a massive screw up of Apple, even bigger than Gemini?
But it's only a screw up if you assume success. And with electric cars, Apple has consistently assumed failure, but invested nonetheless to see if they can do it. So Apple didn't ever say we're going to make an electric car. They've never said that. They've spent a lot of money seeing if they can, and they've briefed analysts on how high the bar is. Now, to be honest, it makes Elon Musk look fantastic that they've done this, because he's if Apple can't do it and he can, what does that say about him? And so I don't think there's a lot of shame in failed experiments. There's more shame to not have done the experiment. Now, obviously, that's relative. Apple has a lot of cash, and this is a small experiment as a proportion of its cash.
But at one point, 2 or 3 years ago, you claimed that the future of Apple was with its cars, and you weren't alone.
I don't know if I did that, actually. I remember the front cover we made with the Apple car, and I think we were skeptics.
You weren't. I was. I'm always a skeptic, then. You believe that there was a massive market for an Apple car?
I think there would be if they can make one, but I think what they've decided is they can't.
Well, it'd be a massive if you and I could make one. That's not saying anything.
Less massive than Apple. I don't think our brand carries the same kudos, or what's the right word?
Do you think they could have dumped the car without the relative success of their new Vision Pro, that one experiment is still alive, so they could quietly dump the car?
I do not think Apple is constrained to the point where they trade off different initiatives money-wise, but I think they are talent-wise. So I think the talent being applied to AI, which is the real story here, is probably more important than being applied to a car right now. Because if they fall behind with AI, they'll be in trouble. I mean, if you think about Siri is a natural language processing front end that has a really stupid back end.
I found this on the web for as a natural language processing front end.
Thank you.
Check it out. Following you, Keith. AI is everywhere. I hope it's not a black Nazi.
But you notice what Siri just said. She said, I found this on the web. The reason Siri says I found this on the web is Siri does not have an AI backend that is capable of answering questions. It has a hand-coded database mapping system, mapping questions to answers that is manual. So Apple...
You know what? I have a really big back end, Keith.
An elephant.
Yeah, solid back ends. I wonder when it comes to the Apple board versus the Google board, when the Google board's looking at what Tim Cook has accomplished at Apple, I mean, Cook succeeded Jobs. Everyone predicted that Cook would be a catastrophe. He hasn't been. Doesn't anything come down to leadership anymore? Are you a structuralist when it comes to controlling these big tech companies? I mean, if Cook was at Google,
actually,
he would do a better job, wouldn't he?
Yeah, you're not wrong, Andrew. I think leadership always has to be accountable, and I never like leaders who blame the soldiers for the problems. And I do think the leadership of Google has to be accountable for what it did. And I'm not trying to get away from that, but I am also saying what they did is entirely consistent with the way society is going. They were in line. It just was an extreme form with ridiculous outcomes of something that's now considered normal and good.
Yeah,
So,
I have to admit, and we'll leave this here and to be very clear, I strongly disagree. I think Google is an outlier, and this idea that somehow Google reflects society to me is absurd. But and I obviously know something about Google, but who knows? This will be a subject we come back to. What about startup of the week? A more cheerful subject. Keith, robots. They're the future, I've heard. Not elephants.
So this company, Figure, is the company that one of the car companies partnered with a few weeks ago. We mentioned it on the show, where they're going to do these humanoid-style robots to do some work on the production line. And so they announced this week that they've raised more than $500 million from Microsoft.
175 million. Microsoft, OpenAI, Amazon, Nvidia, Intel, all the big players.
And you see that, not Google, because
they
Google
missed out.
Well, they missed out by design because they're a let's build it ourselves kind of company. And Microsoft used to be that, but now have realized that their platform is more valuable than owning, the front end, if you will. So, I think this is a sign of the times, this investment, and we're going to see more of it. But it also says that humanoid robots are closer to reality.
What is a humanoid robot? You mean a robot that looks like a human?
Yeah, it's got 2 legs, 2 arms, what look like eyes, and is capable of doing tasks that usually require human dexterity.
So we're heading for a Blade Runner-like future where we won't be able to distinguish between robots and humans?
To me, it looks like what's this Star Wars robot that walks and talks?
Luke Skywalker.
No, that's the human. The robot, it's not R2-D2, it's C-3PO or one of those. I forget which one it is. Somebody will tell me.
So you think that Figure is for real? Usually your startup of the week is usually it's not a startup and it doesn't seem particularly promising, but this one's for real.
It's for real, but it is valued at 2.6 billion, so it doesn't really qualify as a startup anymore.
Well, it's a unicorn, rather like that elephant in the room, yeah. Or maybe actually the more accurate definition of a unicorn is a black Nazi soldier. It's impossible.
Exactly.
Finally, tweet of the week, bringing us down to earth, which is a really bracing tweet for startup entrepreneurs by Amy Lewin. What was Amy saying, Keith?
Well, this is Hopin, the company we've mentioned quite a bit over the years here. It is filed for liquidation in the UK. The company itself still exists as a US corporation, but they're liquidating their base company that was the original founding company in the UK. And the Reshma Sohoni, who was one of the early investors and is a personal friend from Seed Camp, is interviewed talking about what went wrong. So it's actually quite an interesting thread.
What went wrong? Is this the future of Google?
She talked about investors piling in, not wanting to do due diligence because they just wanted to get in.
Well, that's, again, not the first or the last time. Do any tech people ever learn anything from history?
Well, you learn that if you get in early, you make a lot of money as well. So there's more than one lesson. And getting money into a company that's growing and hot is not the worst mistake in the world. Putting money into one that isn't growing and isn't hot is a worse mistake than that.
So are there many Hopins around now, companies that are worth in the billions that tomorrow will be worth zero, maybe Figure?
It's hard to predict which ones will be worth zero, but there's some very, very weighty valuations out there. Perplexity AI, which is the search engine replacement for Google, which, by the way, is fantastic. It really is good. If you haven't tried Perplexity AI, you should. And
so Perplexity sort of squares the circle between search and AI, is that right?
Correct. And then there's the ARC browser, ARC, which is from...
I've tried, which is a bit confusing.
It's a bit confusing user interface, and it's, by the way, it's Chrome with a new shell around it, So it's just Chrome. Most of the coding is done by Chrome developers, and Chrome is open source. It's called Chromium. And so they've put Perplexity AI in as an option. So I think the browser company is the most challenged to justify its valuation.
So final question, Keith, the real elephant in the room. When you get the call from the Google board, you're going to take up the challenge of becoming Google CEO?
You know, people don't tend to hire people that are about to become
white men, white old men like you and I.
Old is the word I was thinking of. Yeah.
You don't have any ethnicity. You're not even Jewish.
I'm Yorkshire. Yorkshire is an ethnicity to anyone who comes from there. We all know.
And you've been persecuted over the ages by the people from Lancashire, haven't you? Can't you claim a tragic history as a collective?
I think we won the War of the Roses, if I'm not mistaken.
You've never experienced any genocide?
Never experienced any genocide.
Well, you're not going to be CEO of Google then.
Andrew, you're in